Okay, simple summary for week one. The way this assignment works is that I'm going to talk about a historical event. You listen to it and then write a short paragraph long, minimum paragraph long summary of what I said, the basic ideas. And then there are a series of questions for you to answer as well. Make sure you don't just do the summary and not do the questions and vice versa. And if once you've done the safe assignment, you will understand it is important. It is your responsibility to make sure that anybody who reads what you turn in, that it's obvious to them, therefore me, that you wrote it, that it's in your words. If you're pasting in something from an encyclopedia, that's going to be obvious. If you're using AI instead of using your brain, that might be a little less obvious, but it's still there. So the whole point of this is for you to listen, learn from what I'm saying, and then write something that makes it clear that you did listen and learn from what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm going to just tell you a story, and it's a true story. Oh, by the way, before I forget, make sure you do the assigned template. Everything should look the same. Cover page, questions, answers, etc. So, okay, here's the story. 700 years ago, the people of Western Europe did not necessarily understand that the entire continent of the Americas existed. What is now North America, Central America, South America, was mostly unknown to them. There were Native Americans there, but Europe didn't understand that that was there. Most people thought, well, by the way, let me dispel a myth. Not very many people in 1400 or so thought the world was flat. I mean, honestly, there's still a few people in 2025 who think that, who should know better. But most people understood that the world was round. But they didn't understand the geography, and they thought if you sailed west from Europe across the Atlantic Ocean and traveled far enough that you would land in what they called the Indies, or what we call Asia. What Columbus and his expedition in 1492 was trying to do was find a shorter way to get to Asia, because to travel over the land was very difficult, all the way across Europe, all the way across what is now Russia, for instance, and China, to get to the Far East. Not easy. Sailing was not easy, because if you had to go all the way down south, you had to sail all the way down Europe and all the way, I don't know why I'm pointing, around the southern tip of Africa, which was a very dangerous place to try to sail a ship. It was a good way to wreck a ship. And it's just a long, long way, all the way across the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. So what they were trying to do, because they didn't understand the layout of the world, was they thought, well, maybe if we sail west, we can just get there easier. Which proves, by the way, that they knew the world was round. So that was the idea. When Columbus reached, I don't want to confuse things by saying Indies. When Columbus reached what later became known as the New World, he thought he had arrived in Asia. And pretty soon afterwards, they kind of figured out, oh, wait, no, okay. Gradually, over the next 20 to 30 years, European expeditions made it clear that there was a giant continent there, that this wasn't the way to Asia. And so the goals for these Western European nations, these are kingdoms. They're, ambitious to become empires. Their goals shifted from, well, here's a cool way, easy way, short way to get to Asia, to, hey, there's a giant mass of land over there. We need to colonize that and take it over. And so that's what basically happened over the next couple of 100 years. The nations of Western Europe, Spain, France, England, Portugal, to a lesser extent, the Netherlands, settled North America. And these countries were largely enemies. I mean, the English and the French fought, depending on how you count it, 41 wars, but just between the two of them over about an 800 or 900 year period. That that's a little bit of fudging of the math. It depends on how you look at it, but the point is they were enemies. So this became a contest, and this is why I call this video The Contest. It is the contest to dominate ultimately North America, because we're talking about the history of the United States, but really all of the Americas. So who are your contenders? Well, Spain was the most powerful country at the time. And so they had the most money, they had the most resources, and they had the early lead. Why is there so much Spanish in South Texas? Because this used to be Mexico, which was colonized by the Spanish. And you go to Central America and you go to Honduras, they speak Spanish. Why? Because Spain was successful in colonizing there. And in much of South America, not universally, there's a few countries with Portuguese, etc., but Spanish, because the Spanish were successful in colonizing. So they took the early lead. The French kind of went in a different direction. They went further north, which is why if you go to Montreal or Quebec City, you must be able to say, you'll be able to handle your business in French, because that is where the French most successfully colonized, although they later lost that territory. The Dutch got a little bit involved. New York City's first name was New Amsterdam. It was a Dutch settlement. They kind of got out of things relatively quickly. The Portuguese explored, but more often than not, they went the other direction, which is why you don't really have a lot of places with Portuguese heritage in the Americas. And then there's England. Now, what language am I using to speak to you right now? That should tell you who the ultimate winner of the contest was, at least in terms of the territory that became the United States. Now, we might think of the English, later known as the British, as, the obvious winner, but it was anything but obvious when they first started out. In fact, in 1588, Spain sent a giant naval force and tons of soldiers and sailors towards England to conquer them, because Spain was still Catholic and the English had become Protestant, and to the Spanish king this was unacceptable, and also a good excuse to invade a country that you want to take over. That invasion was not successful and was the beginning of the end of Spanish power by about 14, I guess, is probably the best year. I'm not going to make you learn these years, by the way. I'm just telling you a story. The Spanish were kind of in decline, and it was the English largely who took their place in terms of being a leader in colonizing the Americas. And we know what happened next. I hope that eventually England established 13 colonies in the sorry, chimes are going off, distracting me. The 13 colonies that became the United States, which I'm, again, not going to make you list them. Hopefully you've seen that. Texas, by the way, not one of them. We'll learn that part of American history later. And this was finally decided after maybe the biggest war, possibly, it's debatable, between England and France, or the British and the French. It happened in 1756, which, if you think about it, is a long way from what I was just talking about a few minutes ago in 1492, okay? In 1756, a war began that, it wasn't a world war, don't get confused, I'm not talking about World War I, but it was the 18th century equivalent of a world war. A lot of nations were involved. And of course, the English were on one side and the French were on the other. By the way, I'm going to stop saying English now, because we're talking about the 1700s. From this point forward, they're the British. So the British and the French go to war for 7 years, hence the name, the 7 Years' War. To make it even more confusing, the war wasn't called that here in North America. It was called the French and Indian War, because that's who the Americans and the British were fighting. The French had help from Native Americans. Anyway, to make a long story short, in 1763, France lost that war, and then the British won. And as a result, France had to kind of, if you think of it as a story, as a movie or a play or a show, this is where France is made out to be the villain. They're not, but they're made out to be the villain, and they have to kind of slink off to the side and be like, I'll get my revenge on you someday. And the British are triumphant. They're the heroes. They've won. The French have to give up the giant Louisiana territory, which does not mean the state of Louisiana. I'm talking about basically the entire middle part of the modern United States. They give it up. They give it to Spain to keep the British from getting it. And the French are out. The contest is over. The British have won the contest. Aha. But there's always a sequel, right? There's always another movie to be made. So yes, in 1783, 20 years after, what happens then? Well, we're going to get into that next week. But spoiler alert, there's going to be an American Revolution. And the British are going to lose everything that they just fought to win. But more to come on that. Okay, that's simple summary for this week. Write this up in your own words. Do not AI this. Do not paste in some stuff from some encyclopedia or something like that. It's pretty simple. Listen and respond in your own words. Conversationally is fine. You don't have to try to write like me. Just write like yourselves. And if you're like, oh, well, this part was crazy, that's fine. Those kind of things tell me that you wrote it. Or, hey, I really thought this was boring. I can live with that as long as I believe you wrote the response. Okay, that's it. Turn it in a Word document, use the template, and we will go from there.